Then each of the next panelists related to the future of print will have a 10-minute presentation, and then they'll also do a panel format. We have coffee in the afternoon. So beginning with Gal Moore, when you're ready, we'll hear about a fast and cool related to print and the future of news. Any questions about what lies ahead, how much fun we're going to have this afternoon? Yeah? Everybody have a good lunch? Okay, no more lunch. Any of you folks on the side want to sit in the center with the rich people? No? They're good seats, I promise. While we have a minute, any questions for things you heard this morning? Anyone was dying to ask a question, they couldn't ask a question? No? Okay. There'll be coffee in the afternoon, and I know the questions are going to come pouring forth. Good. He went back to the office. But it's a question, right? Where's Oren? Oren Zuckerman, is he still? We had lunch. Did he, in very typical Israeli fashion, leave after lunch? I think he did. He would be a good person to answer NUI. I'm wondering who else. Okay, do you have another question? Good. What was the question? Maybe let's crowdsource this question, shall we?
All right, hey. The question is how, well, you talked about the, Amit Moran, I'm from Intel. And Adi talked about the Xbox One, and it's very nice with all kinds of new technologies, and I'm wondering how this will actually inflict on the new media consumption and maybe creation eventually, and how this kind of stuff will be in the future. So, yeah.
So Amit from Intel wants to know about new natural user interfaces, right? Yeah, in relation to media. So, okay, crowd, put on your thinking caps. We're going to come back to that question. But while you're thinking, let's hear from Gal Moore from Holesinthenet.
Hi, glad to be here. Well, I was a couple of years, about 10 years in the traditional online media, and I was getting quite, how do you say it, bored, or feeling that I have to proceed to somewhere that is more suitable for my innovative needs or vision. So I was in YNET, it's a big news site in Israel, and after 10 years I decided to go on. So I had this site, blog, it was used to call a blog, a couple of years ago. Its name is Holesinthenet, and we did all kinds of offbeat news, viral news, things that are visually enhanced content, and commentary, and how do you say, fast and nice news, not very in-depth commentary, but stuff you'd like to watch in a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds when you have between lunchtime and your work due in work. So this was going quite well. It's not as we were successful as New York Times or YNET, which Attila here is from YNET. But we did quite well according to two guys sitting in a coffee shop And you know how it goes when you start your day job in the coffee shop, and then you find out the Wi-Fi is not working, and then you switch to 3G and you see that 3G is not working as well, and then you have to go to another coffee shop and order the 5th coffee you have today, although you're sick and tired of coffee, but you still have to make the machine progress, so you need to drink more coffee and publish another post in the blog. So this was us, totally grassroots site, and we met some kind of a success that is a good trouble. You can say that it's kind of a good trouble, because you need to grow. When you have a site and you do it for amateur purposes, it's great, but it's not your day job. And if you want it to be a day job, you need to make it grow. You need a business model. You need to make it work. So this is us right now. We'll get to it. And I just, in my little time I have, I'll just talk about what, why, and how. Very, very fast and cool. Well, we figured out 55% of our traffic comes from social networks. We were growing pretty hard, and thanks to Facebook. The year was 2009. Facebook evolved in Israel about in 2007. 2009, it was quite big. It was the climax of Facebook in Israel. And we saw we were getting a lot of traffic from Facebook. So we knew we had content that Facebook users love. And it led us to grow in a certain content development strategy that brought us to be a more and more viral site. And if I have to, this is the graph. By the way, we are quite impressed by the details. Last year, it was we had 700K monthly visits, and it's about 400K unique users. And for Israeli mean, it's quite good. It's not the biggest. It's not the top 5, but it's quite good for just a staff of 2 people, maybe 3. And so we thought about a plan. When our motto is all the news that's fit to share, all the stuff you'd like to share with your friends in Facebook, it's pretty much positive news and visual news and stuff people like. So there's not all the stuff or all the news that is important, like you can read in the New York Times or YNET, but it's more kind of social news or social content you'd like to share with your friends, and you feel comfortable about it. So that's what we said, and we took off. And then we knew we had to grow on it. So we had crowdfunding, a Kickstarter campaign in Israel. It's called Head Start, and we raised a bit more than 200K, which is quite good in Israeli means. And we started to grow on our content. It's not your usually content or usually news you can read in news site. It's more animals and more positive news you can read online here. And we thought we are about us more of a news curator with a voice. We want to say something in our unique voice. It's proactive, pro animals, pro causes, and you can see it's a visual kind of news. It's a visual experience. When the question is in our kind of news, other sites are just parasites, like Dilbert called them. Others just grow on other sites, and we say it's not like that, because in our approach, the discussions come first. The comments comes before the news, and we have like right now a talk about a law banning foie gras in Israel. And when we publish this news, we are talking about what the community does and what the community says about it. And what are the activities you can find in online sites?
Yeah, we're a minute and a half over.
Okay.
So can we cut it?
So just getting through the end. This is our crowdfunding, and we, in our final stage, we help everyone be a publisher. We approach companies and we approach personal users, and we help them make more compelling content, and we think this is the future.
Thank you, Gal. Thank you. Eytan? So now each one of the next panelists is going to do a 10-minute presentation, but we have another moderator. I get to drink coffee. Eytan Avriel, founder and editor of The Marker.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me the death slot after the lunch. As have been explained, our four panelists here, we're going to try to tackle the topic of the future of news business. Now, if you take what happened in the first half of the day, I understand there's no future in the news business, but hopefully we might come with some kind of breakthrough. In this panel, we have four panelists. Each of them will come and give a 10-minute presentation, which apparently is timed. And after that, with whatever time left, we're going to do a short panel discussion right here and maybe leave a couple of minutes for questions. So the first panelist is Martin Niesenholtz. Martin, you may come if you want. Martin is Senior Digital Advisor to the New York Times, and in fact, he was in charge of everything digital in the New York Times. And I'm sure everybody's going to be thrilled to hear your presentation. Straight after him, we'll have Noam Lemelstrich, which you all know, Professor Sheizaf Rafaeli, and from the Haifa University, and Attila Somfalvi from YNET. Take it away. Thank you. Did you want?
No,
okay.
Yeah, I can. Is this on? So while the presentation is building, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. Before I get into the formal presentation, I only have about 10 or 15 minutes. I wanted to start with two things. One, something that Martin Eytan asked about first thing, which has to do with the definition of quality. It's important, I think, to kind of really understand what we mean, particularly when we're talking about news and journalism, because there's so much content, so much information, and a lot of it is sort of masquerading as journalism. And so I actually, this is not my definition, but I'll read a definition for you, which we can quibble about, but I think it's pretty good for the most part. And it's basically this: independently reported, verified, branded information, published or broadcast by individuals or institutions, prepared to stand by their stories, despite pressures from commercial or government interests. Now, the reason that's important is because oftentimes in places like the United States or Great Britain or Israel, we sort of take for granted that there's a free press, that there's a group of people who are actually going out, some cases even risking their lives, to go out and ferret out the most important information that the society needs to or should be aware of. And it's very facile, I think, to say that, well, it's really not necessary to have journalists do this or a professional class of people do this. We'll just let people blog and tweet, and it'll happen sort of naturally. And, you know, I'm the last one to suggest that I tweet a lot. I have a blog, but I would be very, very careful about thinking that those things alone are going to replace more traditional quality journalistic practices. And let me give you an example, a very quick example of why I say this. The Boston Globe, which is a paper that the New York Times Company owns, a few years back broke a story about Catholic priests abusing mostly children. And if you think about that for a minute, first of all, it took an enormous amount of investigative reporting to get at that story It took you know, a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort. And the reason is that the church certainly wasn't going to tweet about that. They were, even if they knew about it, which turns out they did, they weren't going to tweet about that. The priests who were doing the abusing weren't going to tweet about that because it wouldn't be in their best interest to do so. The priests who knew the priests who were doing the abusing weren't going to tweet about that. And it turns out that the victims weren't tweeting about it or blogging about it because they felt so ashamed that it was happening to them. So this idea that anything that is known is going to be blogged or tweeted about is a very, very dangerous, I think, road to follow. It's not to say that people shouldn't tweet or blog and it's not very, very valuable and it's great. It is. But the notion of quality journalism underlying democratic societies is extremely important, and you will only miss it when it's gone. And so to talk about, quote, great content, we need to really understand the essence of the problem, which is that as journalism diminishes, governments and corporations are less accountable. It's really that simple. And so I don't think we want that to happen. And that's why, so that's more of a social message than it is a business message, but the two intersect, obviously. So that's why, you know, let me now get to a look back, because we're about 20 years into this process. We started the Times website in '95. Others started a little earlier than that in '94. So we're about 20 years in. And I've just finished a fellowship at Harvard where we actually took a look back, not specifically at the New York Times. I'm going to talk a little bit about the founding of the Times now, Times website now, but about digital journalism in general, actually going back to the teletext and videotext days of the late 1970s and early 1980s, and sort of taking a look at, okay, so if today we're at a certain place, which I think was just described as not being a particularly good one here in 2013, what were some of the seminal decisions that got us there? And as part of this project at Harvard, we talked to 60 people. We could have talked to more. We probably should have talked to more. We just didn't have time, who made most of the decisions or created some of the disruptive technologies that got us to the place that we're at. I was one of those people, having founded the Times website in '95. So I just want to talk about 3 decisions that we made early on, and in a sense, in a self-critical sense, say that we can go back and relitigate those decisions, but these were some of the decisions that were made. So if you look at the entire history of the business, it really divides out into six pieces. I'm just going to talk about the first piece today. I don't have time to do the rest, obviously. It's an interesting story, but we're not going to obviously be able to get to it. But I do want to talk about the very early decisions. Now, I talked about quality journalism. I also want to just make sure everybody understands or has the same definition in their heads with respect to what we mean by this notion of a classic media intermediary. Carl Fremont talked today about audience targeting, and this is a very disruptive, this notion of audience targeting, which surrounds programmatic buying, is a very disruptive notion to this idea of a media intermediary, because traditionally what media intermediaries do is they collect audiences, and those audiences are proxies for certain behaviors. And because we can now target those behaviors directly, the strength or the value of an intermediary diminishes. So that's essentially the problem. That's essentially the problem. The businesses that were formerly 80%, even 85% supported by advertising can no longer be supported at that level by advertising. So I want to talk about the 3 key decisions that we made at the outset. And the reason I want to do this is because it will inform where we go from here, okay? The first one has to do with the product. So when I walked into the organization, the frame of reference to me was Yahoo. Yahoo, this is a slide from Yahoo in 1990, I think 6. And essentially what Yahoo did is it did what we call curates the web through a bunch of human editors, in fact. And so when I arrived at the Times, I said, well, why shouldn't we kind of do this? I'm not a journalist. I arrived kind of as an interactive media guy. I started very early on. Actually, Martin was my first boss. And I thought, well, we should probably do something like this. Around the same time, the Boston Globe had come up with this. This is the Boston.com screen from 1996, I think. And if the Design It people are still in the room, this is I award this the ugliest web page in the history of the internet. But let me just tell you what the reason that this is not here to describe. I think the term crappy user experience. First of all, it was done in 96, so there's got to be something forgiven for that. But the main thing is that the Boston folks did essentially what these guys were doing in a much cleaner UI. So instead of calling it the BostonGlobe.com, they called it Boston.com. So they broke with the brand. And the other thing that they did is they created this notion of a kind of a portal to Boston. It wasn't just news. It was a bunch of information services. And so it was a very, very different and more radical view of the brand and what news could be on the web than most of the other folks had done. So my view was, well, let's sort of do this at the Times. And I realized very quickly that wasn't going to happen. So what we did was this. And so the first and most important thing to understand about what most news websites were at the beginning, and therefore most still are, is almost pure expressions of the print brand, right? So the web was not viewed, in Clay Christensen's terms, as a disruptive innovation. It was viewed as a sustaining innovation. And a sustaining innovation essentially makes existing products better. That's the purpose of what it is, okay? So what does that mean in terms of the World Wide Web? It means very simply global distribution. It means that you can it means that you can take the content, which is obviously very, very good content, and push it out to a global audience. And mostly everybody decided that was the central purpose of the web, okay? It wasn't to disrupt anything. And so as a result, in some part, the disruptors came in and later did what they did because these decisions were made early on. The second decision that we all had to make is this very interesting one, number 2, this notion of free versus pay. Now, when I walked into the company, the idea that we would have a free website was really quite anathema. But what happened in those early years is there was an almost immediate collision between formerly siloed businesses. So what is very important to understand is that early on, Reuters, which is one of the largest news services in the world, bought a little piece of Yahoo. And they provided their news feed to Yahoo, and Yahoo came out with something called Yahoo News for free. And immediately after that, or almost immediately after that, CNN came out with CNN.com for free. So what happened is the collision of media types, which was obviously inevitable, created this notion of free. And free actually, yeah, I got 5 minutes. So free actually became the ethos of the day. What did that mean? It meant that these businesses were going to be 100% advertiser supported, okay? So let's now connect the dots, go back to what Carl Fremont was talking about before, go back to where we are today. Free carries on. It does quite well for a very long time. I mean, the Times on the web grew advertising revenues double digits for many, many, many years. But then 2008 came along, and there was a kind of perfect storm. Lehman Brothers goes out of business, advertising markets crash, and programmatic and ad tech come into the scene at the same time. So what we have today is a situation where the digital ad streams in premium content are quite unstable. And that's why you're seeing a lot more pay model, so-called paywalls, and I agree with, someone said paywall is a very unfriendly term, absolutely right. Actually, subscriptions is probably not a bad way to describe what people are doing, which is a funny sort of crowdsourcing in a way, but in any event, so the new model for journalism has become a kind of mixed subscription advertising model, but not nearly in the way that it was in the past, because the pricing power just simply isn't there. And look, we can go back and we can relitigate some of these decisions. I happen to believe that the pricing power isn't there for a lot of complex reasons, not because people didn't charge at the beginning, but it still presents a significant problem for journalism. And then the third piece had to do with the kinds of people who came into these organizations early on and populated them. And there has always been a tension between the more, let's just say, the more analog-oriented folks and the more digital-oriented folks. Now, that's no longer as true, obviously. Things have changed dramatically in the last 3, 4, 5 years. But at the beginning, there was a great deal of tension, and that was true probably on a global basis for 10 years. So what happened is, as a result, the traditional journalistic institutions lacked engineering talent. When we went out and talked to people as part of this Harvard project, one of the folks we talked to was Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google. And I said to him, look, one of the raps on traditional journalistic institutions is that they don't innovate as quickly as entrepreneurial institutions, or even purely digital ones like Google. And he said, stop right there. He said, there's a very, very simple explanation for that. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, you guys have no engineers. Well, that's not quite true. We have 115 engineers at the New York Times Company. But for many years, it sort of was true. And even 115 as compared with the large cloud-based disruptive companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft to some extent, others, it's a drop in the bucket. So the innovation potential, both on the engineering side and on the innovation side, is greatly diminished, because engineers are the ones pretty much who create the innovation. So I'm out of time, I know, but I just wanted to focus on those two things, the kind of why quality matters in a democracy when it comes to news, and two, what some of the seminal decisions were made at the outset that kind of got us to the place that we are. And we can now talk about where we're going at some other point, but let's at least recognize why we are where we are. So, thank you.
Okay, we'll do the question afterwards. So I'd like to call Dr. Noam Lemelstrich from the School of Communication right here.
Hi, Martin talked about where we were, and I'd like to talk about where we are going. Martin also mentioned quality journalism, and my thoughts are that quality journalism is in a big danger in light of what's happening with technology, and specifically with artificial intelligence. The topic of my lecture is artificial intelligence and the freedom of journalists. Just one word about intelligence. I love this definition by Jung, the ability of the brain to see order in what was perceived as chaos or disorder before. And artificial intelligence is the science of making machines do things which would require human intelligence. So we expect artificial intelligence to see order in the big chaos that we are all talking about, technology chaos that affects all media. There are 5 areas that artificial intelligence is affecting journalism or media, One is the creation of digital identities. I will elaborate a few words on each. The other is automatic tagging of content. The third one is the measuring of consumer involvement, engagement, we mentioned before. The fourth one is analyzing context automatically. The word automation will, even if I don't say automation, I mean automation. And the fifth one is developing AI engines to target ads per consumer digital profiles. There is another area which I didn't mention is computational journalism, data-driven journalism, or what we call analytics. Today there are quite a lot of media who use analytics to put in front of the journalists every day how many people tweets per their stories. And if they don't get enough tweets, they are in trouble. But it's really in a step in the direction that I'm heading about artificial intelligence. This is really an intermediary stage where we are now when we talk about analytics vis-a-vis newsrooms. But as I said, as written here, stories, AI is also developing the ability to write, to replace journalism by writing stories. And this is now done in sports stories. The creation of digital profiles. That was mentioned here before that unless we have Android and we have the Apple, unless we have a global standard, the effects will be slower. But unfortunately, in digital profiles, the world is adopting a world standard that collects data from everything that we do on the internet, and with using one standard, it will really make much faster the kind of phenomenon that I'm talking about. Wait a minute. 10 minutes, 1 hour. Wait. Come on. I don't use my glasses. I don't have my glasses on, okay? Okay. Our digital profile is being created on 5 different inputs, internet surfing, social genetics, social networks, and virtual worlds. And all these are really used to create the puzzle that will define us as human beings in the coming era. In social genetics, there's a lot of work done in leading research institutes tying genetics to our social behavior, to our psychological, psychiatric behavior. I mentioned here some of these academic institutes to identify genes, whether we are socially proactive or anti or pro. There are commercial companies, and that also, if you, for example, you send your saliva to 23andMe, the company owned by the wife of Sergey Brin of Google, by coincidence, they can tell you, they can predict what kind of person you are. And I told to my faculty, next time I'm going to hire someone to my staff in the school, I will ask them to send me a saliva, and I will send it to 23andMe, and maybe they have some psychiatric problems. So there's also a lot of businesses that are that are connecting genes to our qualities, to our personality. There's a lot of work, and the guy Adi Diamond from Microsoft told us before that they also develop avatars to their customers, and they analyze from the avatars these hidden qualities and characteristics of personality of the users. I put this about 2 years ago, but it's happening today by Microsoft, as we heard this morning. Another area is automatic tagging of content. There's a tremendous amount of work done in different research institutes, and tagging automatically text, video, audio, and pictures. The content is being translated to bits of information, and there's a lot of work. I don't even want you to start reading it. Information retrieval research done by computer science departments around the world, and we tag what we put on Instagram, on Flickr, and YouTube, and these pictures are being compared with the automatic tagging of all this work that done by computer scientists. And slowly, we are able to create automatic tagging to video content and to text content. Why is it important? I will explain later. For example, Facebook has put their automatic face tagging recognition of faces. Another area of where artificial intelligence is greatly making inroads is measuring consumer involvement, engagement, and we heard some talks about this morning. They study 3 dimensions, the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral. While we watch our television, we interact with it, we use our cellular or our iPhone or whatever device, we communicate with the content, and every button that we press is being collected by the companies, by the Googles and the Yahoos, to see how we react to content along these 3 different criteria. And there's scientific research which shows that the more we are involved in cognitive, emotional, and behavioral to a content on television, whether it's an advertising or a film, the more we will buy the products that are being associated, being advertised. The whole idea of analyzing this is targeting contents to people per their personality. Another area is analyzing the context of. We don't leave anything outside of the picture. People are doing today. They study the context, the mood of the consumer, the social context of viewing, and the geographical location. For example, they study how your mood affects your reaction to the different advertising, the mood of the program. There's a lot of work done today studying how the mood of the program affects the kind of products you advertise near this kind of contents. And it has a relationship. The impact of the TV program on the appreciation of the ads. All this is done automatically. Computers have no problem with big numbers, with billions. So all this is, again, being introduced, the data being collected by advertising agencies that will, in the end, for example, they study the context of whether we view with the pub, or we view the content in YouTube, or with friends in the living room. All this affects how we react to advertising and to content. Of course, also geographical location. In the old days, it used to be redlining, where you used to live in a certain neighborhood. If you live in a poor neighborhood, they would know. If you go to a bank, the bank wouldn't talk to you much. But if you live in a rich neighborhood, today we are being web-blind, so the geographical location also is added to our profile. And so we are, in the end, the whole idea is to target content and advertising based on our personality. And this is Eric Schmidt, that was mentioned before, said the technology will be so good that it will be very hard to people to watch or consume. 1 minute, okay. The technology will be so good, it will be very hard to people to watch or consume something that has not been, in a sense, been tailored for them. There's a lot of work done in social networks as well to add to our profiles. I wrote a paper in 2004 about building a social DNA to people, and now it's being used by commercial companies to find customers, our friends of customers. Another quote that I want to end more or less my talk. Most people will have personalized news on mobile type devices that will largely replace their traditional reading of newspapers. And then I want to go to this last section. All these 5 areas that I mentioned lead to targeting ads to people's personalities, which allows companies to analyze the automatic analysis of ROI of each journalist and article. Today, in the near future, the media companies will be able to measure the interaction, how many ads or products are sold near the specific stories that the journalists write, and they will, in the end, demand the journalist to produce content that maximize the ROI of the company, which in my opinion, Martin mentioned quality journalism. Tomorrow, New York Times will be able to find out how many products are being sold near each article or news, and they will, maybe New York Times have such a long tradition, maybe it's not a good example, but a lot of newspapers that need advertising to survive will demand the journalists to maximize ROI and to write on topics that will sell products. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noam. The next speaker is Professor Sheizaf Rafaeli from University of Haifa.
So do two negatives make a positive? I will not mention Eric Schmidt the second time.
He will know about this, don't worry.
For the Hebrew speakers in the audience, I was wondering how many of you, just by raise of hand, read about the Emmanuel Rosen affair, what is it now, 3 weeks ago? First, not on a newspaper. How many of you? Okay, I guess my work is done. Because the point is that it's not clear that newspapers are where news is consumed anymore. In the 10 minutes allotted to me, I have absolutely no chance of saying everything I think, not even reading the list of headers of what I think about newspapers, but I will start with this slide and I'll end with this slide. I'll say these are what I think are the main points that if I had time, I would spend on elaborating. I'd say that prediction in this age is a tricky business. I would try to tease out this notion of disruptive technology that, like Eric Schmidt, showed up again and again today and will continue to show up. What does it mean that a technology is disruptive? In Hebrew, do we mean me'areret or do we mean meharheret? I would tease, if I had time, the notion of the absence of a center or the disappearance of a center and the replacement of a center with a packet-switched reality. And I would talk about some of the directions into which newspapers are going, including crowdsourcing and interactivity and backpack journalism and long tail and hypertext and filter bubbles and bring your own device and research online, purchase offline, or research offline and purchase online, something that's happening in the commercial arena but also in news. Talk about aggregation and its role in reshaping journalism in general. Talk about visualization and its new form. I think echoes of some of this reverberated when we listened to some of the startups and innovations and entrepreneurial attempts. I would talk about micropayments and digital payments and the way payment methods affect the paywall's chances. But I don't have time to do all of that, so instead let me just admit to having designed an even uglier website prior to '96. I was responsible for the first Israeli newspaper online. That was 1994 and was the Globe's newspaper, and it was a lot ugly. It was even more problematic. And so sometimes I ask myself if this is the result of my work of having created ugly newspapers online. I committed this sin twice. Once with online newspapers, the regular kind of newspapers, and the second time with scientific journals, which I also was part of putting online. And this is the reaction of one sector in the Israeli society. It's the ultra-Orthodox casting all aspersions possible on the internet in general and newspapers in particular. And I suspect the traditional journalists are not that far away from the sentiments expressed here. Noam, I wonder if they did sentiment analysis on this, would they come up with something different from the sentiment analysis that editors come up when they see these numbers? The fact that people are reading less and less news off traditional media and more on the yellow rapidly ascending line. And when we talk about people in general, this becomes even more pronounced when you look at elites. When you look at the young people, the educated and so forth, the slope is even steeper for them. They read their news online, and even more so, and more interestingly, they do so even when the news on the traditional media is given away for free. So when we discuss journalism online, there are all sorts of questions that come up. One of the most up-to-date is the question of whether social media do indeed replace in any form that is acceptable in quality, to use your test of quality, do they replace the old formats? Erdogan seems to think that they do. If we go through the revolutions of the last 4 years, for each one of the revolutions on the Taksim Square in Turkey, these weeks prior to that, Tahrir Square in Cairo, if you look at the so-called cottage cheese revolution here in Israel, if you look at the not so successful attempts at revolution in Moldova and Iran, at every single turn of events, you have Twitter and Facebook and the social media either assigned the blame or given the credit for this. And there's also some pushback, some people saying, no, the revolution will not be tweeted or hasn't been tweeted. The ties are not strong enough on social networks for revolution to actually take root from there. There's Morozov's work in The Net Delusion and his more recent book, Gladwell's Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted, and others. We're left with a question. Is the old form of journalism changing, being redesigned? Does the fact that this is the cartoonist's view of events, it's not the newspapers, and it's not the Satan behind the microphone, nor is it the politician, it's the swords that are mightier than the pen, but this time the swords have a little tag on them called Facebook and Twitter. So what are we looking at here? What is this? No, seriously, when you know, people jitter and laugh, but what is this picture a picture of? And so, sorry? Romania. Some people say Romania. I wonder, 5 minutes. I wonder why Romania is your association. What do other people see here? What other people would formally use as a description for this is to say these are old women using a personal computer. And I'd like to suggest that I don't know how old they are, and also it's not polite to ask, but I'm sure it's not a personal computer. It is neither personal nor a computer. It's a machine or device that is used mostly not for computing, and it is used mostly not in personal sorts of use. And that's the essence. Those who understand that this is not a personal computer, but rather a communication device that is used socially, understand the direction in which we're going and may also be able to acquire some ideas as to where news organizations need to go in the future. Again, 10 minutes is not even enough to list the headlines, but let me suggest that there are some sources you might want to go to and familiarize yourself with to understand the direction in which news organizations and news media will go, ought to go, or will miss, and therefore will go head down. Sources include Shirky's series of books. They include We the Media, Dan Gilmore, who should be mentioned here as often as Eric Schmidt in this notion of media active or media turning around, the ideas behind network and net play that I'm proud to have been part of. But the notion that we now have fewer journalism textbooks and more Facebook activism books, but most interestingly in terms of empirical data, some of the numbers coming out of the Pew Center research efforts and their very recent report, State of the Media, Alan Murray's work and people who preceded him there at the Pew Center, with data about newspaper revenues falling, data about the existing organizations for news changing, the arrival of hundreds of newspapers behind paywalls, the shift of revenue away from advertising to circulation becoming the main or the growing source of circulation and subscription, becoming the main and growing source of revenue. But most interestingly of all, the data coming out of the Pew Project, and the most recent data was published just 2 months ago in March 2013, the numbers indicating that the newsroom workforce is declining, i.e. the quality of journalism is suffering, and at the same time, a very large number, the bottom line here, very large number, a very large proportion of the audience see themselves not just as consumers of news content, but as the producers of news content. If news is becoming more and more news generated by the audience, a prosumer type of experience, produced and consumed by the same people. 43% of the people in the survey carried out by Pew indicate that they add to the news that they themselves consume. We're facing a new environment, probably best expressed by these two redheads. So who are these Jinjin? On the right, I think everybody in the room recognizes. Mark Zuckerberg. On the left, maybe fewer people. How many people in the room do not recognize the head on the left? At least a room full of honest people. So that's Zuckerberg on the right and Gutenberg on the left. And the question is the transition from Zuckerberg to Gutenberg. But I'd like to also show two additional males who are not redheads. In fact, they don't seem to have a whole lot of hair. Recognition? Weil on the right and Rosenblum on the left. Brand new, 1 minute. Brand new news, both of which about the encroachment of social media and internet on the production of news and the way it is created. So between these two redheads and these not two redheads, we have some nuggets of where the news is going. When Gutenberg made the transition from scrolls to print, and when Zuckerberg accompanies the transition from book or print to digital, we are accompanied by a bunch of changes, including backpack journalism and long-tail audiences and hypertext expression and social, local, and mobile opportunities, aggregation and visualization, digital payments and micropayments. And I don't have time to talk about each one of these, but I'll just say an organization that doesn't pick up the notion of backpack journalism, an organization that pretends to provide journalism in the age of data and doesn't train its employees in the practices of using big data. So it's not just figuring out their psychology, Noam, when interviewing new faculty, it's figuring out their statistics in figuring out new faculty because this is this. And lastly, the aggregation capabilities of using the tools of networks to pull many more strands of information together. They are what I think are the news of the future and where news organizations are going to. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sheizaf. I'd like to call Attila Somfalvi to give his presentation.
Good afternoon. I do not have a presentation, actually, so I'll be shorter than... I have only one page to show you, but it will take 1 second. A few facts. I work for YNET. For those who are not familiar with I wanted to say popular site. It is the biggest news site in Israel, actually the biggest content site in Israel. It belongs to Yediot Achronot, which is still the biggest paper, at least as influence. YNET was born in 2000, which means we are 13, bar mitzvah. And today we have 1.2 million readers a day, unique users every day, each day. And we have more than double when we have a war or elections or whatever happens here in the Middle East. And we always have something going on here. Anyway, I'm telling you these facts just because 13 years ago when I told my parents I finished the army, I served in the Bamachane, which is the army's newspaper. And I told my parents, listen, I'm going to work in the internet. So my parents were hysterical. They were sure I'm going to join a combat unit. And I'm an only child. My mother wanted to kill herself. I said, no, don't worry, I'm going to work in the internet. And she said, what do you mean? Working for what? I said, I'm going to be a journalist, writing for a paper on the internet. So she said, you are kidding me. Bring me the paper. I said, there's no paper. And those were the facts 13 years ago. Nobody knew what YNET means. Nobody knew that, actually we started the new journalism that is today a 24/7 site, working 365 days a year, including Yom Kippur. We used to have 1 or 2 guys working during Yom Kippur. Of course, not updating all the time, but we still work. And I was asked to talk about what it means to be a new journalist, and I would like to tell you that transformation, you see the transformation. I am the transformation itself. Because 13 years ago, when I started to work for YNET, I was a correspondent. And my duty was to write and to send an article or to send a story, you know, the usual classical journalist work. And a few years after, I was asked one day in 2005 if I was asked if I mind. You know what? I wasn't asked. I wasn't asked. They gave me a camera, a stills camera. And it was during the disengagement in 2005. All of the reporters of YNET got a camera next to a laptop, and then we were asked to send in pictures too. And we just saw before the backpack journalism. And this is the backpack journalism. We had a laptop, we had a camera, we had a pen. Sometimes we had also a video camera. And one guy, one-man show, we were asked to send articles and pictures and videos and anything else. That was in 2005. And that was the moment when actually YNET started to be also not only a site, a news site, but also video and provider in some ways. That was 8 years ago. Now, today, when I'm asked what do, I say, well, I'm a journalist, of course. I work for YNET, but I am also, except the fact that I'm the site political correspondent and analyst, I'm the anchorman for the YNET TV. Well, it sounds weird, perhaps, because it is absolutely not what I started with. I didn't mean to be on TV. I was asked to be a journalist. This is what they paid me for. Today, in the modern era, a journalist has to work like this, around 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, the whole year, every day, including weekends. He has to be fast, to write short, and to move fast. And of course, a journalist today has to know how to present its story on camera and also to speak on the radio, because I forgot to tell you, YNET also provides news to half of the local radio stations in Israel. Meaning, the journalists, the reporters are asked also to record their articles or their reports for the radio. So if 13 years ago you were asked to write, now you are asked to write and record and show up at the studio when you are required to, and to know how to talk and speak and put on a tie. And it's very hard, by the way, because our reporters are not used to this. I'm always asking people to come to the studio with a tie. Usually it ends up with a t-shirt. But this is also Israel, so it will take some time to make people get used to it. In the first years when I started to work for YNET, I worked almost every day, and I didn't find it hard, because the fact that I was posting my articles almost at the same moment when I wrote them, it gave me a huge ambition to keep on working. And the fact that I came from the printed press, and the fact that I felt that I have some impact. At the beginning, I didn't have impact, because at the beginning, when I started to be a journalist on the internet, the first thing, I covered the police for 2 years, and I was meeting with senior officers in the police in 2001. Probably you remember this, Eytan. I was telling them the same story that I had to tell my parents. So where do you work? I said, the internet. Right. When do you print your story? I said, all the time. When can I see the paper? You can't. And then I found out he has no idea what the internet is. So it took half of the time to understand how to get connected. Today, of course, it is different. And the impact that we have on the internet is very big. Most of the people, most of the readers, a lot of readers in Israel are connected almost all the time to YNET, at least once a day. And Israel is a very lucky country, I mean, we are really lucky because Israel is a country that is addicted to news. Therefore, when you have the mivzakim, what we call the breaking news all the time on the right, most of the people watch this every day, all the time. The rating of those breaking news are the highest on the site. Is the highest on the site. Because people like to, these are all around 50, 60 words only. Those are the news I can show you. Very short, almost only a headline, you see? Only a headline and 2-3 lines. That's it. This is what people want. I'm done. What? 1 minute or 5? I can see. 1 minute, okay. Yeah. Okay, I have 1 minute. I want to show you something. Because I was telling you that I started to write, and then I started to be a cameraman, and then I started to present. And this is what we do actually today. This is the, I don't know, I can do it, right? There's no keyboard here. Ah, there is? Perfect. Okay, I can show you something. Because this is the new media. The internet is going towards television. We are trying to adapt to the new media. That people want more and more information in the same place, but also short, and we are trying to figure out today what to do with the video and the TV, because we don't really know what you want. I mean, the readers. And this is our biggest challenge today, to find out what people want to see or watch over the internet. And the last thing I'm going to tell you, in October we started our new studio. And we were very lucky because we had the elections in the States, and then we had a war. I'm sorry to say that we were lucky, but this is in the news business. You are very lucky when you have a war, because when you have a war, people are watching nonstop what's going on. And we had great luck with the war in Gaza, meaning a lot of people were watching YNET live. And then we started to try to understand what people want. Do they want every day at 12 o'clock to have a news, whatever? And we found out people don't want to come to YNET and watch stuff when we tell them. They want to come wherever they have time, and we still don't know what to do with this information. We're trying to figure out the future, actually. And this is what I want to show you what we are doing today. This is the last thing I'm going to show you before I leave the stage. It's very hard for me to leave the stage, but I'm going to do it. Just 1 second. All right. I want to remind you, we started 13 years ago with very few readers, just writing some text. And we were really, really, really happy when we had like around 5,000 readers. 1 more second. Yeah.
We're going to invite the panelists, the people who presented, to please come up and join, and I'll invite Eytan to take over. Thank you. And you can still look for
Yeah, you know, it's very exciting for me to show you this because I was there almost from the first day. And this is what we are today. The big changes in what we call the internet and internet journalism. Well, not that. I'm sorry. Nobody paid me for that. This was the first broadcast. This is transformation. Thank you.
Right, so just sit down, Attila. So now how you know how to read teleprompters on video. I know there's no business model for internet, but this is taking promotion a long way. Well, we don't have a lot of time, and I've been told we have to make this short because we want to leave a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. So I'm going to try and put you 3 questions. One very quick and amusing, and then maybe we'll dig somewhat deeper in the issues. Just tell me, each of you, if you had to go on an island and pick an iPad, and the iPad is broken, you can only have one news site, which one would you do? And Attila, you can't do YNET. You can't do in the New York Times, sorry. You've been disqualified.
Frankly, I would take the New York Times.
I just broke my iPad, so this is a real question. And I think it's such an easy question that it will sound like it was planted, but the answer is Google News.
One Google News, one New York Times. Martin, you want to go for Twitter or what?
Oh, no, I don't want to go for Twitter. I would, look, if it wasn't the New York, probably the Washington Post.
Okay. Attila, you can choose a Hebrew site, which is not YNET.
I'm going to tell you what I want to pick. It's Arts and Letters. You know this site?
Okay.
It's the greatest site that it's very simple. It has a lot of links to great stuff all over the world.
That will not work with me, that effort to try
I tried.
Okay, one site. You can choose a site from abroad. Google.
Yeah. Not news, Google, the site.
Just Google. Okay, it actually leads me to the next question, which is again for all of you, because looking beyond the question of digital versus print and social and all that, I'm very worried that news and journalism and everything is losing its capability of being the watchdog of democracy, of doing the basic jobs of bringing the truth to people. What do you think the situation is right now, even with the newspapers we have, and how bad or how is it going to look in 5 years from now, where everybody is dependent probably on some big advertisers and there's absolutely no business model elsewhere? So, again, Sheizaf.
Well, I wouldn't be so apocryphal. As I said, the data are indicating that the financial source of support for newspapers is shifting from, for those that still survive, is shifting from advertising to circulation or subscription through things like firewalls, paywalls, and other format. It's not clear
but do you feel, is the job being done right now? Do you think that they're fulfilling?
Absolutely not, which was my second point.
Okay.
Advertising is not going to become big enough to make that much of a difference in comparison to what it has been doing. But newspapers haven't been doing such a good job in the first place anyhow. The job of being a watchdog has for a long time been usurped by other political entities and not the press. And this thing called the fourth sector, fourth estate, is probably already replaced by a fifth estate, much discussed in the literature. And so newspapers bemoaning the loss of owning the responsibility for being watchdogs is actually bemoaning something that they've given up a long time ago. You have given up a long time ago.
We'll discuss that afterwards.
There are two opposing forces. Fortunately, one, of course, is what I mentioned before, that advertising will know people and will put them into a bubble. There's a very good book called The Filter Bubble, which is recommended to everybody. So the trouble with the bubble is that when we get the content that is targeted to us, we are not aware that we are in this bubble. So there's a danger that people will not be aware of losing the kind of quality journalism that you talk about. On the other hand, because everybody has access to the internet and social networks, there is a chance that there will be a backlash by masses of people who will realize that they are being cornered like in like George Orwell world, and there may be a backlash. And I hope that these two forces, the backlash of the audiences, of the crowds, vis-a-vis the advertisers who want to put us in a bubble, I hope that there will be some kind of intermediate way that quality journalism will survive by crowdfunding and other sources.
Is there quality journalism now?
Well, I'm a dean of a school. You want to kill me? Well, no.
Okay. Martin.
Okay. Just, kind of focusing on the U.S. market for just a moment, I think there are basically three different kinds of journalistic entities. There are ones that are nationally based, like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN. They have a much better chance of surviving over the long term and being fairly vibrant, I think. On the other extreme, there are very, very local, principally local newspapers that also, the papers that Warren Buffett has been acquiring as an example, that are also quite vibrant. It's the big city papers, the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, although the Post is a bit of a hybrid. Those are the ones that are seeing the economics diminish fastest. And the problem with that is that, those are the ones that are really covering the city halls, the local businesses. They may not be doing, the ideal job, but they do a hell of a lot better than no job, trust me. And so the problem is, I think, at least in the next 5 years, to use your time frame, those are the entities that I think are most at risk.
Well, the deeper question is, maybe they'll survive. Maybe somehow there'll be something. Is it going to be journalism to the level that society needs it? Or maybe I'm going to throw you something. Maybe government should sponsor that the same way it does with the BBC. And you should put 10 times much more money in that. So we'll have 5 newspapers and 3 television stations, all sponsored by taxpayers' money. Quality stuff.
That puts a lot of, the BBC is a wonderful institution. There's no question. Even with the recent scandal and the stuff that's surrounding them, they do an amazing job. I think maybe it's just that I'm an American, but I fundamentally distrust government, and therefore I fundamentally distrust a government that pays for the press, even if there are significant firewalls in that system. Is it better to have that than nothing? Of course, yeah. But I think that the best system is one where the press is fully independent of the government. But that's just my opinion. It certainly isn't, borne out by the experience of the vast experience of the BBC. So I understand your point.
Okay.
It's also better than billionaire oligarchs.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. That's my in fact that's my next question. Attila, is there good journalism in Israel?
There is good journalism in Israel. I can tell you that every journalist and every paper and every site and every television station or every radio station is the best site or the best journalism. Of course not. And of course that every media group, I guess, has its problems and interests and whatever. And everybody knows that in Israel the media has huge financial problems. And that of course influences many people's work. But I'm not so worried about journalism and good journalism, because I think that what we see today and what we witness today on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever, we see the public court. And the power of the public today that is much more active, much more involved, much less apathetic than it was 5 years ago, for example, those are good news. I mean, Eytan and Attila don't have actually to be there in order for the people to make themselves heard. And sometimes when you have the public outrage being heard out there on the social media, it has a great impact, much greater or much bigger than it has when you put up an article that you worked for it 2 or 3 weeks to investigate something and nobody read it. Today, when you put out something on your status on Facebook, for example, or people retweet you and share your stuff, it's much tougher and harder and harsher and faster, of course, than to write and work and investigate and go and deep throat and so on. Therefore, I'm not so worried, because when people, they make a decision when they want to read something good or something smart, they can find it on the internet, and they can find the place where it exists. So we shouldn't be worried, because in some way, eventually, the transformation will bring us to a shore, and I'm not sure it's a safe shore or a rich shore, but it will be a shore where people will make the decision that I will read sports here and politics there and financial news another place.
Okay, well,
the congregation of the news will come from different places. So
you're not worried and you're optimistic, maybe because it's.
I have to be optimistic.
Maybe because it's your, maybe because it's your young.
Or stupid, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just to add 3 sentences, if I may, come back. One is, I think your question morphed as you went along. You started out with whether journalism is serving its role as a watchdog, and you ended with the question is there good journalism? Those are 2 different questions.
I meant to stay with the first one. And
I think there's good journalism, and even if it's advertising supported, sometimes when it is advertising supported, there could be good journalism. But your question was more specific. It was about journalists as a watchdog. And in that case, the answer clearly is the fifth estate, that is the public. But then you added another question I think is a really interesting twist, and that was the role of government in funding journalism. And there seems to be a clear divide here. Are you democratic and therefore believe that government shouldn't dabble in journalism, or are you somehow in favor of the BBC, NPR, Arutz Rishon in Israel, and so forth, where the government does get involved? There's actually a middle way that I think we should sit up and notice. There are increasing numbers of media outlets and a growing audience to government-funded journalism that comes from abroad. And by that I mean audiences to the BBC in Israel, audiences to Radio Free Europe, I used to work for that radio station, audiences, excuse the term, for Al Jazeera here in Israel, and so forth. It used to be that entities like Kol Hara'am were just to be made fun of. But that's no longer the case. And government-funded journalism that is intended across borders, becoming more possible because the internet is a lot more difficult to block, is one part of the puzzle of journalism playing watchdog with public money.
As a sort of last question, since I've been shown the dreadful piece of white paper, an oligarch comes to you, or an investor, or a rich guy, and tells you the following: since you're all expert in media, I want you guys to build me a new news media company, and I have a budget. I want it to be quite popular. I want it to be self-supporting, so it won't lose money, and I want it to be influential on the public debate. Now, you're required to say how you're going to do it and how much it's going to cost. Attila, we can start. Video on the web, maybe.
The first tip is take your hands off. Let us work. You were asking about good journalism. I think the first, still, even in the modern era, people do want to read trusted stuff. And they do want to read people that they can trust, that they are not biased. And this is the first thing. The second one is...
No, but how are you going to do it? Seriously.
What, physically? I mean,
no, what's the business model? What are you going to do? You're going to do a brand new digital only? You're going to try to do a mixed? You're going to try to do video? You're going to try to just social blog everything?
Okay,
only curation? Give me your idea if YNET goes down and you have to find a new job.
It's web-based, of course, internet, of course, cellular and all this, and iPads. it has to be on this platform. I am a big fan of paper, but I do believe that people are changing. I'm 34. Last year was the first time I read my first piece on a Kindle. And it was a huge blow for me. I mean, just buying the Kindle was like, I was shocked. And I want to tell you something. After 33 years with books and papers and magazines, and I still am subscribed to Time Magazine and New Yorker and stuff like that because I like to get it. I'm telling you that today I read books only on Kindle. All right? Therefore, the basis for a new media outlet has to be on the web, no paper, not even television. And of course, in this web-based new paper, I will introduce video and news by video and the commentators that will be filmed and write, and everything has to be accurate. But I think the first requirement from this oligarch is please take your hands off, let me work for 5 years, and then perhaps you'll have what you asked for, a trusted media outlet.
Okay, Martin, what's the next thing?
I think, it would be fascinating if somebody tried to do that, going back to my point, in a distinct local area. In other words, instead of trying to compete with Google News or, in a purely journalistic context, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal in the U.S., to really try and develop a new model for local journalism. I don't think a lot has been done there. AOL has been, trying to create this business called Patch, which is kind of almost a kind of blogging approach in hundreds of very local places, but nobody is focused on trying to find a model for big cities. So that's what I would do.
Local or vertical or both?
I'm sorry?
Local or vertical or both?
Both.
Both. Okay. Noam?
Well, the underlying assumption is that I will be approached by the oligarch. I find this disturbing. I would work for an oligarch if he comes to me and tells me, listen, I want you to start a new media channel to protect the environment. And this is my vision, this is my mission. In that case, at my age, I would go for it if this guy is willing to invest a lot of money, like Al Gore at the time. But I definitely go to.
Professor, you said influential.
Sorry.
It has to be influential.
Of course, influence on the environment, of course. So I would create a new media, of course, webby, that will involve a lot of crowdsourcing and social networks. I will try to take advantage of people's experiences around the world to create a new media that I believe will be also self-sustained if it will have an impact. But I will definitely limit it to a vision that I can agree with.
Okay.
So I have a confession to make. I start reading the newspaper from the talkbacks up. And I don't think it's that embarrassing a confession because I think many people do the same. And I think many people believe that that's where the real nuggets are. Therefore, when interpreting your question about creating an organ that will have a lot of impact, the question is, do we continue to measure it in the same way that traditional media have been measured? And traditional media have been measured by impressions. How many eyeballs saw your message? How many eardrums were affected by your message? The measuring coin of the realm was impressions. In the next 5 years, and in fact already today, we're moving from impressions to expressions. And the measure of impact is not about how many eyeballs see it or how many eardrums are affected by it, but rather how many tongues get moved or how many fingers go clicking. And so a new medium will have to be one that is geared towards and makes use of expression. And one last sentence, this is actually a whole lot less news or interesting, what I just said, because those of us who do read news through filtering mechanisms that rank the order of what gets presented to us, but by what other people were looking at or by what other sources were linking at, are already doing that. We're doing news by expression a lot more than by impression. There are problems there. The filter bubble is a problem. There are other problems. The echo chamber issues are problems. But we're already moving from impressions to expressions, and whether the oligarch pays me or not, that's going to happen.
All right, I'm not sure I got exactly the print to do what should be done, but do we have time for questions? Just straight coffee? Okay, I guess we're out of time, and thank you for this, and see you next year.